We're here this evening to present an overview of the Chuckanut Community Forest Master Plan. What we're going to be presenting tonight is the public engagement and the key plan concept components that we've come up with so far. This will be a presentation that will include me. I'm Nicole Oliver, the Parks and Recreation Director for the City of Bellingham. Lane Potter, who is our Design and Development Manager at the City of Bellingham in the Parks Department. And we have the help of two consultants today, David Roberts and Sarah Parker from Peak Sustainability, who have been helping us with this project. Now, right now, because we're in a webinar format, we're going to be recording this. That already started. And you are all participants right now. And after we get through the presentation, we're going to promote you all so we can have some facilitated question and answer and have a discussion. So that's the plan. And so let's get started. So the Chuckanut Community Forest. What we've been doing with the community forest, I'm going to show some videos as we go through this. We have some clips that our BTV10 camera folks took for us. The Parks and Recreation Department acknowledges that we gather on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Lummi people and the Nooksack people who have lived in the Coast Salish region since time immemorial. The Parks and Recreation Department honors our shared responsibilities to their homeland. We are grateful for the opportunity to learn from Indigenous wisdom and ways of creating relationships that will sustain us all on this land for future generations. So our agenda today, we're going to talk about the acquisition history, the core planning goals of the project, the public survey results, our draft trail plan, how this planning process in this area is going to proposing to deal with dogs and bicycles, proposed improvements, our phased implementation plan, and a stewardship plan. So the planning area and access encompasses all the contiguous forest between Fairhaven Park, the interurban trail out to Hoax Pond and down to Old Samish Road. The Chuckanut Community Forest itself is an easement, an 82-acre parcel inside a 111-acre forested park in South Bellingham. It's mostly open space trails and parks, and it's we included the entire boundary that you see in red in the planning area. Much of the property is covered by native, mature coniferous forest intermixed with wetlands. The property hosts a web of forested trails that connect surrounding parks and neighborhoods. Neighbors and other park visitors use the 100-acre woods trails for recreational and multimodal transportation purposes. In addition to its recreational functions, the property has critical ecological functions. Various native plant and wildlife species rely on the area for habitat and use the forested corridor to migrate through the surrounding urban setting. The key access points are the interurban trail. There's an access right there at Willis. There is two access points off of Chuckanut Drive, one at Viewcrest Road and one at 16th Street. There's an access from the top of Fairhaven Park at the upper shelter that comes into the forest. And there's also an access from 18th Street, the end of 18th Street. And there actually is a couple other access points, but those are the main ones. Okay, so the history. It's a very interesting project. The history of this area goes back to the beginning of the Greenways program. And throughout the 90s, into the early 2000s, there were multiple greenway acquisitions of parcels along the interurban greenway corridor. In 2011, the Chuckanut Community Forest itself was purchased. It was acquired due to the foreclosure of a development, and it was owned by Washington Federal Savings and backed by broad community support to purchase the property with Greenway levy funds, park impact fees, and a loan that was paid back by the Park District. Voters approved the formation of the Chuckanut Community Forest Park District to ensure the entirety of the property is protected in public ownership in perpetuity. And that happened in 2013. That Chuckanut Community Forest Park District was created. In 2014, the conservation easement was recorded, and that was as consideration for repayment of the loan and for the purpose of protecting the natural attributes of the land while providing for recreational, educational, and scientific uses. In addition, there is a 2014 interlocal agreement that was established, and we have a really wonderful baseline study documentation report from 2017 that is an in-depth look at the property from an environmental perspective. So what is a park master plan? Well, park master plans, the purpose is to create a dynamic, long-lasting plan that sets the priorities and informs the strategies to guide the future of this property. The plan will be a reference for all future improvements and projects planned within the boundary, but it is not a regulatory document. Permits will be required for any projects of any conceivable size and nature that would require a permit to do any work. And some of the work, such as improving additional hydrologic connections and creating boardwalks like the one from 18th Street entrance at Fairhaven Park entrance, those will require significant and current in time critical areas permits to see exactly what's going on at that moment in time. So this is a plan that will guide us, and it will set what can and cannot be done over time. It also, all of our master plans are referred to in the Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Plan, which is part of the comprehensive plan, but this is the more specific vision for how this property is to be used in the future. Major improvements would also be included in the budget as well. So this is a quick recap of the planning process to date. We funded the project and presented an outline to the Greenways Advisory Committee, Parks Board, the Chuckanut Community Forest Park District in January and February of 2020. We amended the outline, the boundary, and the name of the project at that time to really focus in on this contiguous forest parcel. We had 10 steering committee meetings, and those included members, representatives from the neighborhoods that surround this area, including Happy Valley, South Neighborhood, Edgemore, Fairhaven. Did I say Happy Valley? And Happy Valley. We also had members of the Chuckanut Community Forest District on our steering committee and an environmental planner. And all of the material was posted on our Engage Bellingham site on the city's website. So from June through, for 6 months, we met a couple of times a month and then sometimes twice a month and sometimes once a month. And we did a very significant survey. Once we kind of started our initial approach, we wanted to make sure that the community who was using the forest agreed with where we were headed. So we launched a survey that ran on Engage Bellingham from August through September 15th that I'll go over the results of that. And we kind of started to narrow down. We also looked at all the information we have within the city. The city's also just starting phase 2 of our urban forestry management plan. So we were able to see some of those preliminary results from that work, and just really understanding what we were getting ourselves into with this particular planning process. In September, we looked at our final survey results. We talked about wayfinding and access, what our objectives were for the trail. We talked about what trails needed to stay and what trails needed to be removed. And then in October, it was announced that the Park District had hired Herrera to augment the planning process with a more in-depth stewardship plan. We also will talk about that a little bit later. We also did in-person survey counts. The steering committee volunteers went in person in October and actually counted people, dogs, and bicycles and what people were doing to help support that, just to further have a better understanding of what people were doing. And then we proposed this phased approach that you're going to see now in this presentation to this committee, and then finalized our materials in December, and here we are. So here's the public survey results. Let's see, we had over 700 people respond to the survey, which was really quite extraordinary. We put QR codes at entrances and around the neighborhood, and 716, there it is. So the intent was to gather input, and we really felt like this survey, we were able to get some great information from folks who are using and love this area. 99% visit the planning area, which is really good. And 64% visit the planning area at least once a week. The primary uses were walking, dog walking, recreational biking, bird watching, and wildlife viewing. So we were really interested in how people get there. What is their main access? The main access points, the number one that, according to the survey, was the interurban trail entrance, and the second one was the Fairhaven Park upper shelter. When we did the in-person counts, folks only stood at the bench as you go in toward the boardwalk between the 18th Street and Fairhaven Park entrance. And that was in the point in time, or the in-person counts, it corroborated this information as well. So Viewcrest being the third most common entrance off of Chuckanut. And here we see that access at the interurban trail. There's a park regulation sign, there's trail access, and it heads up an old logging road and kind of transects the forest from the interurban over to Fairhaven Park. Here is the access point from Viewcrest, that secondary, the second most popular way to get in, or maybe the third after the park entrance. And this is at Chuckanut Drive in Viewcrest. There's some minimal parking in this location, and the plan proposes that we do some improvements to that parking later on in phase 2. So uses, this is kind of impossible for you all to see really well, but you can pull this up on the website and hopefully look at it in more detail if you're interested. We just really wanted to see what people thought was a legitimate use in this area. And so where we had pretty solid agreement was that we needed some directional signage. There have been quite a few people who have been lost in this area, and wayfinding was definitely something that many people wanted. Boardwalks and bridges, native plant garden, an improved limestone trail, benches, educational informational kiosks, informal outdoor learning spaces. Those were things that a lot of people said that they would be okay with, and they agreed that that would be a legitimate use. But what they didn't want to see is additional parking or any paved trails or a covered view pavilion, or for that matter, really any significant development structure of any kind. And so that was something that was also really clear from the survey. And then we had pages and pages and pages of open-ended comments. Some of the most common thoughts were that less is more, that this is a very unique wild area that needs to be protected, that they value it for the solitude and sanctuary in a busy urban city. And what they do want, though, is the maps, the signage, garbage and dog waste receptacles. There was some consideration for additional bathrooms. Some of the concerns that were raised were about the continuing on again, off again homeless encampments in the site. The way that taxes, there were concerns raised about the Metropolitan Park District and that loan and taxes, concerns about protecting the habitat from any development. And then there were some concerns about that wildland, urban interface, fire risk, that kind of thing. And then bicycles were a little bit of one of the things that was kind of up in the air. There was some disagreement on whether bicycles should be allowed or actually shouldn't be allowed at all. So the complete survey results can be seen again on that Engage Bellingham website. This is that 2-day point in time trail count, live and in person, that several steering committee members and some volunteers helped do that. I'm trying to find more information on that. Yeah, there were 36 volunteers who did that on a Saturday and a Monday in October. The weather was mild. It was a little bit rainy, but it was Indigenous Peoples Day. It used to be called Columbus Day. They took head counts from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. on Saturday and 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. on Monday. And interestingly, only 27 of the 169 dogs counted on both days were off leash at the entrances. If you looked at canine to human percentages, around 1/3 of human visitors had a dog on leash each day. So 70 of 229 on the first day and 99 of 290 on the second day. So the total count by user group, 44% was walkers, followed by on-leash dogs and bike riders. The total access points and entrances was the highest volume was from that entry point from the north, either from 18th or Fairhaven Park. And so that was 53%. Let's see, in total, 229 people visited the forest walking on Saturday and 290 on Monday. That's 519 adults. Also, they counted 19 children on Saturday and 9 on Monday. Again, they did note that bicycle riders, motorboards, there was some usage from the north side entrance at the Stone Bench. There were 28 counted on Saturday and 27 on Monday. And at the Interurban Trail, there were 21 bikes on Saturday and 40 on Monday. And there was some thought maybe that was commuters. At the Viewcrest entrance on Saturday, there were 18 riders on Saturday and 23 on Monday. So again, this did substantiate what we found that people reported, they self-reported in the survey, was consistent with what we counted in person. And just one more thing about the dogs. On Saturday, 40 dogs were counted at the 18th Street Stone Bench, 28 at the Viewcrest entry, and 12 at the Interurban Trail. That's 70 dogs for Saturday. On Monday, there were 42 at 18th Street, 33 at Viewcrest, and 24 at the Interurban Trail. That's a total of 99 dogs on Monday. And again, most of those dogs, 83%, were on leash as they entered into the park where they were being counted. So putting this all together, we saw some clear outcomes. 88% of the survey's respondents agreed that the proposed master plan should include all those contiguous properties, forested properties, and 63% said that the planning area should be named the 100-acre wood. We did agree that this process would include the naming of the forest. The name of this master planning process is still the Chuckanut Community Forest, but ultimately what the plan is proposing is to name the area the 100-acre wood. And it was pretty clear that 67% agreed that dogs should continue to be on leash in the park, as is the current rule. All right, so now we're getting into the proposed master plan components.
Great, thank you, Nicole. And as Nicole mentioned, I'm Lane Potter. I'm the Design and Development Manager for the Parks Department at the City of Bellingham. I'm going to start to talk about the proposed master plan components. Based on the public input and steering committee guidance, we've developed some core concepts for the master plan. And the steering committee this winter has approved an outline for the document. The core planning goals are shown here. The Chuckanut Community Forest Master Plan aims to keep all goals and objectives under these four main guiding concepts. This plan will be used to guide activities and decision-making within the planning area boundary that serve to restore and preserve the natural environment while providing conscientious educational and recreational opportunities to a diverse group of users. Additionally, the plan considers climate resiliency. These goals were refined during our steering committee meetings and prioritized throughout the master planning process. We'll start by taking a look at the draft trail plan, which includes trails to improve and a main loop trail, trails to decommission, remove, or restore. And as Nicole mentioned, wayfinding was one of the most common needs and requests we got from the survey. So locations for wayfinding and your HERE maps, access points, and the Chuckanut Community Forest Trail Plan will aim to improve visitor experience while protecting and enhancing the natural environment within the park boundary. The following maps, including the draft trail plan, are the trails to improve, wayfinding, and trails to decommission. The steering committee determined the following high-level objectives for the trail plan. The first being establishing a main loop trail, and the second being establishing a clear connection from the north end, Fairhaven Park, to the interurban trail. The master plan will be used for prioritization and decision-making, and ground truthing of every trail to be maintained or removed is not included or fully assessed in this planning stage. Here's a quick clip of an example of a trail improvement. This is an example of a crushed limestone trail that's been built to city design standards and maintained by the Parks Department. And you'll see going forward in the next few maps where we're proposing trail improvements and where we're proposing to keep things as they currently exist on site. To start off with, here's an overview of existing trails on site. You can see the existing trail network with both primary trails and minor trails. Note that the blue on the map indicates the extent of a delineated wetland on site. This trail network was mapped in the 2017 baseline report based off of extracted data from Strava users, which was then given to city GIS staff who ran geoprocessing tools to create a center line for each trail. In determining which trails to keep and which to decommission, a list of criteria was developed by the steering committee and considered such items as, does the trail negatively impact ecological or hydrologic function within the community forest? Is it safe? Is the trail eroding or at risk of eroding? And is the trail redundant? Does it offer a unique experience different from another nearby trail? Here you'll see a couple video examples from around the forest of places where trails have been heavily impacted and widened and they're in need of some narrowing, or possibly places that have been identified for evaluation to see if they need to be removed, rerouted, or realigned to preserve the values that we've mentioned throughout this presentation. We'll start looking at the trails to improve here. So the map on your left that you're looking at is right out of the 2017 baseline. And we use this to look at some possible trail improvements that would have low impacts overall to the forest. As Nicole mentioned, the Parks Department is not exempt from permitting or critical area review. Boardwalks and aluminum crossings may be appropriate in some places, but this can be quite costly. Each project, as informed by the master plan, will require a full environmental analysis at the time it's designed and funded. So this master plan should be easy to read and interpret so you can use it as a decision-making tool going forward. So as you'll see on the right, we're proposing a trail improvement in two different phases. The first phase is the dark purple line you'll see, and you'll notice it follows the old bed alignment that's shown on the baseline map. The second phase is pulled out and identified as a possible phase 2 improvement because that trail goes through some critical areas and wetlands, and it's not a clear trail maintenance project. The next slide gives you a quick look at this old road bed. This is how it currently exists in the forest. So this would be the road bed alignment we'd be proposing to improve that would connect from the interurban north to Fairhaven Park. The next map that's part of the trail plan is our proposed trails to decommission, remove, restore. As I mentioned earlier, the steering committee came up with a list of trails to remove based on environmental impacts, trail redundancy, looking at trails close by that provide the same user experience, and also looking at public safety, steep slopes, erosion. Another consideration for us at the Parks Department is whether a trail can be maintained. So you'll see there on the map, there are some trails that have been identified to be restored or removed. In addition to these that have been clearly identified, there's other trails that have been identified throughout the forest that are in need of further evaluation or assessment, and possibly some rerouting or realignment to make sure that they're as low impact as possible. The next portion of the draft trail plan is wayfinding and access. You'll see a couple examples there of wayfinding throughout our park system, one from Cornwall Park, it's a You Are Here map, and then our standard wayfinding bollard from Northridge Park giving directional signage. So the wayfinding and access map that you're looking at here was created through a few different meetings with the steering committee. We talked about signage and wayfinding being important tools for park users to navigate the trails easily and safely. Signage also gives the city of Bellingham an opportunity to welcome the public, direct and manage impacts, and educate and inform. The following wayfinding and signage improvements aim to serve the goals of the plan. We'll add signage to clearly mark all public access points, install a comprehensive trail map at the primary park entrances, and locate a wayfinding sign at key trail intersections on the main loop trail. There's also been some proposals put forward to add fire warning signage at primary access points during periods of heightened fire danger. One of the items that came up, as Nicole mentioned a lot during the public survey and throughout the steering committee, was dogs and bikes. So as a follow-up to this public house, open house we're having this evening, we'll be opening up a survey for the next 10 days to get some follow-up input on these two items. Right now, the plan proposes to keep dogs on leash, add signage to remind people of the rules, and add dog waste stations. This is all in an effort to protect the sensitive wildlife habitat and ecological functions of the area. And if you'll think back to the proposed trail plan showing the purple segment and pink segment along the old road bed, this plan proposes to improve those trails from Fairhaven Park to the interurban trail with limestone as part of phase 1. Park users will walk their bikes on other trails. This is a unique idea that attempts to balance the effects of biking in sensitive areas with recreational and commuter use in the forest. You will have an opportunity after this evening to provide input on those two items. And I'm going to turn it back over to Nicole to talk about some proposed improvements in the forest.
Okay, thank you, Lane. So improvements, some of the, again, being consistent with what we heard, which is less is more. Some of the things that we are exploring and embarking upon include some native plant interpretation, keeping in line with the overall goals of education, being an important component of the forest. Some benches, additional benches carefully located where we wouldn't be having any negative impacts. We want to improve the existing parking areas, but again, no expansion of those areas. But we do think that we could improve, especially the ones off of Chuckanut, to be a little more clear, a little safer, and just have a better experience for those who want to park there. We also are embarking on this idea of an outdoor learning area, which I'm going to show you an example of. And then definitely those garbage and dog waste stations, additional dog waste stations, as dogs are clearly a common visitor into this area. Okay, so this is a proposal from Recreation Northwest. They are a park steward of Fairhaven Park. Recreation Northwest is a nonprofit that partners with the city, has partnered with the city on a couple of pretty amazing projects in Fairhaven Park, including the boardwalk and the trail from 18th Street. There is a significant mitigation planting area that was done because of the impacts of moving and creating that boardwalk and obliterating the old trail that many of you may recall that was very, very muddy, went through a really nice wetland. That wetland is now protected by a boardwalk, and there is a really robust mitigation site that they have, Recreation Northwest and volunteers have been maintaining for a long time. Right across, if you look at this graphic, Fairhaven Park is to your left. And they are proposing, there is already a gate in that location coming into the little native plant garden. We're working with Recreation Northwest on some native plant identification signage for that garden. There is an existing stone bench that acknowledged all of the volunteer efforts and hours and donations of time and expertise that helped make that boardwalk a reality. And they cleared, as a part of another just work party. They just like to do work parties out here, and I'm sure many of you have been part of those. They cleared the area across the trail. You see the picture of it in the upper left. All they did was clear blackberry, and they were going to mulch and plant, and then they realized there's really nothing there, and this would be an ideal spot that would have minimal impact on any of the existing mature forest to site a small outdoor classroom. There's a group of outdoor educators that are working together on this project with Recreation Northwest. They've come together with a volunteer landscape architect, and they are working on some real, to really make this thing a reality. It's something that, interestingly, the Parks Department is in the middle of a recreation needs assessment. And one of the things that the community is really longing for is more outdoor learning spaces. So this would be a small outdoor classroom outside of the mature easement area of the forest. It's close to Fairhaven Park and the amenities there with parking and restrooms. And it could easily be reached by classrooms walking from either direction on a trail that's already built. So this is one of those cool ideas that is coming to fruition as we're working through this process. So the phased implementation is how we're proposing to, in the Parks Department, we often have different phases of plans. You may recall right now we've completed phase 1 of the new Cordata Community Park with the playgrounds, and we are completing design of phase 2, which is going to involve a park pavilion and some many people are very excited about some new pickleball courts. We often phase implementation because it's just not realistic to do everything you want to do at once, but it's also really good to phase things so that we prioritize the most important things first. And then over time, we can complete other projects as we have the budget and ability to get those things done. So the phase 1, those are the things we're going to do first, would include improving that gravel road bed between the interurban trail and Fairhaven Park. Again, this would be where we would direct bicyclists, and with some signage asking that bikes are walked anywhere else in the forest. Install the wayfinding signage that we spoke about at those points on the map that Lane described, the You Are Here maps, and some other wayfinding to keep people on the main loop trail. add dogway stations, and really reinforce the on-leash signage. Because this area hasn't yet to be master planned, it doesn't have a lot of signage. And so most people obey what the rules are. And so with increased signage, we think we can get more people to put their dogs on a leash. That's a problem throughout the park system that we're working on some improvements with social marketing of why it's so important to keep your dogs off leash, especially in forested and riparian areas. And then the other part of phase one would be to block and restore those trails to be decommissioned. We've already done a little bit of that in the forest, and we'll continue to do so, as well as continue to remove any structures that are built. There was a period of time where there was consistently bike jumps being built that we were consistently taking down, and then they'd be rebuilt, and then we take them down. And we just, by really focusing on where we want people to go, most people will go in those spots and start to restore and plant the edges and narrow down those redundant trails and those areas where the trails are too wide and are getting wider. With the increased use, it's only going to get worse. And so we really need to focus on narrowing down the main trails and trying to keep the bicycles from being on the really narrow, very pristine trails, but preserve those as well. So phase two, that would be to fund and build those water crossings. That's what Recreation Northwest did with that boardwalk. And those are significant projects, significant efforts that would need to be funded and budgeted in our capital improvement plan at the park department. Improve the existing park entrances, other amenities such as benches or bridges that may be identified, and then complete the restoration project consistent with the stewardship plan and the urban forestry management plan. We believe that we're going to be getting some significant priorities and guidance out of that urban forestry management plan. And I believe that the stewardship plan, my understanding of it is that it will help really prioritize the most important areas and provide some real more specific guidance on how to conduct that restoration. And here is a slide that we received from Herrera. Again, they were hired by the Chuckanut Community Forest District to create a stewardship plan for the forest. And this is to help implement and inform that long-term restoration and stewardship. So this is what they are saying that will be included. We have provided all of our GIS layers that we have on the forest to this group. We have a lot of inventory that is really tree by tree that's in that urban forest plan that they can really dial into and look at the structure in a more specific way than the urban forestry plan is looking at the city as a whole. They'll be able to use that data and really dial it in. And so they're going to be developing restoration needs and strategies, helping us prioritize the preservation, what's the most important areas that we really need to try and avoid and preserve. They're going to conduct ground truthing and identify habitat opportunities and consider connectivity as well. So the next steps. We are going to compile the feedback that we receive. This will be posted, this presentation will be posted on our Engage Bellingham page, and we are going to keep a survey open through next week. We have a final steering committee on March 25th. We are finalizing the draft master plan right now. It's looking really good. We are going to be presenting the plan to the Chuckanut Community Forest Park District Board, the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board, and City Council. That's how we approve master plans. We need to get a recommendation from the Parks Board, and then final approval needs to be from the City Council. We expect to start that process here within a few months. And then we also need to amend and reassign the conservation easement. That's part of the park district. And we would, once this plan is approved, we would petition to dissolve the Chuckanut Community Forest Park District. And I think that is it. So I think I'm going to turn it over to David to facilitate the Q&A, or to join us for the Q&A. And as folks raise their hand or ask questions, we're going to promote you, kind of like the city council does. We'll promote you to a panelist, and you'll be able to turn on your camera and unmute yourself and let us know what your question is.
And Nicole, I might just note that if people would rather submit their comments through the Q&A, they can put their comments there. That's the best place. I see I have some who have submitted through the chat, so I'm going to try and weave them in as well, and maybe we'll get those going first and then see how the video participation works. We're kind of experimenting a little bit tonight, so hope everyone's patient. But
thank you. That's great.
So we have a couple of questions, and perhaps you can start by one of you, either you or Lane, answering these. Sue Blethen first asked, she had two questions. The first is, how long is the master plan, or how long does it last?
Well, master plans, once they're approved, they last until they are proposed to be modified. We have master plans that date back many years that we still are implementing and using today. The Seahome Arboretum Board, which I think is the Seahome Arboretum Master Plan, which is kind of similar to this as far as a forest, was done in the 90s, and we still use it as a guide today. So it will last until, for any reason, something would change that we would want to do something different. And keep in mind the 82 acres in that easement area that make up the bulk of the forest will always be in a conservation easement.
And so along that lines, how long do the goals or objectives last that are, I assume, in the master plan itself?
Well, the goals and the objectives are also part of the master plan. And again, we are going to be revising the easement that will to reflect the goals and objectives and the narrowed uses that are we have articulated in the master plan, so that the easement and the master plan are consistent. And again, that easement is in perpetuity. It's an easement, it's a conservation easement. So the master plan itself, we don't expect any significant changes. I think we have very clear and very clear input from the public and the users, and we've all been in agreement as we've gone through this process. It's really hasn't been controversial. We're all pretty consistent about what should and shouldn't happen here, and I don't see this happening. I don't see this changing at all.
Okay, very good. Well, let's see. We also had a question from, or a comment and question from B. Hasenjager. If I understand the bike proposal, you're effectively proposing bikes are banned from riding trails in the 100 acres other than on the main wide trail through the area. Is that right?
That is correct. That is the proposal. And again, this is something that we've embarked upon with the community when we instituted the e-bikes allowed on all trails. BMC, the changes to the Bellingham Municipal Code that allowed e-bikes on all trails within the city. We promised the community that we'd be looking at some of our more pristine areas that are being heavily impacted by the incredible increased popularity in mountain biking and biking in Bellingham, to try and address some places where we would limit bikes. And it's not something we've tried before, and we welcome your feedback on this concept.
All right, and I'll finish up the ones that came through the chat now with Catherine. Had a question. What is ground truthing?
I think what they're talking about is just going out and really looking at the site and not just reading about what the environmental documents or our GIS layers say, but going out and looking at the wetlands, looking at the flora and fauna that are on the site, and ground truthing that information.
Okay. Very good. Now I'm going to move over to the Q&As, and I encourage you others, if they wish to submit their questions or comments that way, that's perfectly fine. Ted Wolf asked, he's curious about the considerations that led to the proposal to decommission the access trail that enters the park just opposite of Clarita Moore Loop on the interurban trail. Wetlands a concern, but there is some important trail connectivity there, and also a wonderful part of the 100-acre wood to transit on foot.
Yes, that is, when we looked at the most recent Strava heat map, it is a very popular connector. The reason that it was determined that it should go away is exactly what you just said, the adjacency to one of the most important forested wetlands in the area, as well as the fact that it was a very steep slope and narrow trail and could erode over time. But again, this is the proposal, and this is the perfect time to provide your feedback, and want to hear from what folks think about that connector. Again, this is another reason why we want to limit bikes, is some of these very narrow, steep trails can really lead to erosion over time with a lot of additional bike use.
So Nicole, this is not a question that I've seen, but you mentioned the Strava heat map or whatever you mentioned there. Could you explain that a little bit for everybody? Because you used that term several times.
Yes, thank you for asking, David. It is it's basically what people are reporting on their phones that they're doing when they're out walking, biking, running, especially runners and athletes use it when they're exercising, and they track their how far they go, and then they post it up to a server. And so we download, especially in areas that don't have established trails, we download information from these servers to see where people are actually going. And that helps us determine the best place to locate a trail, improve a trail, or what trails might be redundant or underused.
Okay, that's helpful. Now I know too. I was wondering all this time what that meant. So a couple more questions coming in on the chat, or comments actually. Sounds like we should not allow bikes with 3 exclamation marks. Comment noted. And let's see, Mary says, I see the garbage cans aren't in phase 1 or 2, although were mentioned previously.
Well, no, they should be in phase 1. Thank you, Mary, for pointing that out. They're definitely part of the phase 1 implementation. Yeah, I didn't mention it. Yeah, their dog waste stations and dogs on lease signage are in phase 1. Okay.
Now that's a garbage can for dog waste, but not necessarily a garbage can.
You got to remember that garbage cans have to be reached by a truck in order to be. So we may add some additional actual full-size cans at main entrances, but they have to be able to be accessible by our staff to it. We don't want them up in the forest. The dog waste stations, we have a little more leeway with that, especially if we get people to take care of it.
Yep, and Bart suggested it's the forest, pack it out, and it should be the rule. Okay, I'm going to swing over. Steve Walker actually had the first question, but he loaded it up on Q&A now. He noted that there's a small area of the map. Let's see here. Can you show a map that delineates the conservation easement held by the Whatcom Land Trust inside the planning area?
I think he's talking about the upper northeast corner that leads up to Cody Circle.
Lane's pulled up here now.
That's the green hashed line is the easement area, but the project boundary extends to all those contiguous forested parcels. And there is a little chunk that's not included in this project area over in the northeast corner that is already has a conservation easement on it, right?
Is that the one that was shown as not colored in the earlier map, Lane? I think that's the one he was talking about. There was a small chunk just above Hoag's Pond that
That's
was
right.
a little rectangle there. That must be the one, perhaps. Hopefully that gets at your question there, Steve. And Catherine, now, is it possible to have a main trail leading from the main entrances for bike riders to ride their bikes on for transportation, or just to get from one area to the next?
And that is what we're proposing, is a main trail that would be for bikes as well, to get from the main exits, the main entrances from one side to the other. That's part of the plan.
Okay.
We've added phase 2 that would get you out to that other access off of Chuckanut as well, because of the number of people that are coming in from that direction. And this is, again, this is a compromise. We're trying to do our best to really recognize that we can't have full access to bikes everywhere if we're going to also really do a very diligent and careful job of improving habitat and restoring some of these trails. And so it's a concept that we're exploring in this plan. And we would, you're welcome to submit your comments, especially on the Engage Bellingham website in this next week about that particular thing.
And all of these comments tonight will be captured as well in the chat and so forth. So an anonymous attendee said, is the limestone trail the same surface that is currently on the interurban trail? I'm concerned about losing the walking in a forest aspect when using the trails.
So again, we're only talking about improving that one already graveled roadway. And so the limestone is what we typically use. It's on the interurban, but that's a pretty wide trail. It would be more comparable to the trail that leads into the forest from Fairhaven Park and 18th Street, and is a limestone improved trail. What we're talking about is only improving that one roadbed with limestone, and the rest of the trails would remain the way they are, except for specific projects, restoration projects that were focusing on restoring hydrology between wetlands.
And you showed a picture, one of the very first pictures was a similar type of trail configuration, as I recall, in your presentation.
So that's exactly to the point that I think that person was making, is that we don't want to lose that natural earth trail experience that's on predominantly the trails within this area. We're proposing not to change that and only improve one major kind of cut through.
And that is in fact a roadbed already, correct?
Yes.
So it's not the same as the forest trails in that way.
Right.
All right. Well, thank you, Anonymous. Barbara says, just because dogs are presently in the forest doesn't mean to me that we need to allow them. I have seen lots of dogs off leash in the park until they are leashed just prior to leaving the forest. Why can't we just keep them in Fairhaven Park and in the interurban, on the interurban?
Well, I think we also did talk about dogs quite a bit within the steering committee, and it's pretty hard to. I mean, this is really a great place to take your dog, but keeping it on a leash is important. There isn't really signage to that effect, and we're hoping that we can improve the leash use within the forest with improved signage. But banning dogs altogether was just not something that seemed like a reasonable thing, given how many people use it every day to walk their dogs.
Thanks, Nicole. Ted Wolf again asks, he's curious whether the carbon storage, soils plus mature trees, has been assessed or will be assessed as the conifers in the Chuckanut Community Forest or 100-acre woods are really just entering their big carbon capture decades as they reach the 100-year age class and grow to true maturity. This parcel is going to be important to city efforts to combat climate change.
Yes, all the more reason to do our best to improve it and protect it and restore it. All the reasons that you just said. We're not specifically measuring its ability to in this planning effort, but we do hope to get some policy guidance and more citywide guidance on how best to restore and protect our urban forests from that urban forestry management plan that is underway.
Okay. And John McLaughlin asked, thank you for overview of your work, reflecting considerable depth regarding the main loop trail connection between Viewcrest and 16th Street access points, crosses wetland CC or its buffer. Has there been any consideration of avoiding wetland conflicts by rerouting west of wetland CC and parallel to Chuckanut Drive? Short connector distance could be done on terrestrial soil, yet not far enough from Chuckanut Drive for pedestrian safety, or yet far enough for safety.
Yeah, I do believe that we're hoping to get some more in-depth recommendations from Herrera on that point. I know they're dialing into those critical wetland impacts of the existing trail. As I'm sure many of you know, there are times of year when there's running water on that section of trail. And so we do believe that that is an area that's going to require a significant project to change it and get it out of the wetland and have less impacts of the trail. It will be a significant project. And again, that's one of the reasons we're not proposing to improve it right now, is because we want to fix it. And that will take permitting and a real deep look. And we're hoping to get some recommendations from Herrera's work on that area.
So Jennifer has a question about the black gate near 18th Street access. It seems like it's not being used.
That's a gate that marks where that native plant garden is. You're going to see some new signage that kind of help interpret that whole project that will help explain it, but it's really a visual cue to mark the project and where that native plant garden is going to, you're going to see more use once we get the signage in there. But it is kind of a gate to nowhere quite yet.
Yeah, it feels that way when you walk by it down there. It's more for the looks at the moment, isn't it? Let's see. Irina had a question. Why does the city need to petition to dissolve the Chuckanut Forest Park District? If the Park District is able to pay off their loan, why is a petition needed? Well,
that's just something that's we've consistently identified that is what would happen once the park district would need to go away once the master plan was approved and the debt was paid off. And so it's articulated in the interlocal agreement that the city would petition to do so, but they certainly have the right to dissolve themselves on their own.
This may be a repeat now, Steve, I'm not sure, but why was the small area of park property in the northeast corner location of the map near Cody Circle left out of the planning area?
I can take that one.
Lane, do you want to answer that?
Sure. So that area just south of Cody Circle is not actually fee-owned city property. It's a conservation and public access easement. So we felt it was appropriate not to include that in the planning area boundary at this time.
Is that the one that the land trust owns then, or is that something different?
So the northeast corner by Cody Circle is, I believe, what Steve's question is about, and it's a conservation easement. It's privately owned property.
Okay. Is there any chance that it would be incorporated at some point in the future, or just for planning purposes or anything, or is it just because it's private, it doesn't get considered?
Well, I think we kept it out because the conservation easement there likely has some different terms than the conservation easement for the Chuckanut Community Forest. And so just kind of focusing on one set of perpetual guidelines at a time. I believe that particular conservation easement is really for habitat preservation and then allowing one future trail to go through there for a connection, which is, if you look in our city's comprehensive plan, there is a proposed trail corridor through that area. So it's a very specific easement. There's no terms of that easement that we would be looking to amend or change at this point in time. It's pretty clear about what can and can't happen in there.
We don't typically master plan private property either.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Kurt Gilden has a comment. First, he likes to agree with Ted for walkers, not bikes, but I'm going to allow him to speak here. Oh, do you want to still speak, Kurt? Is that, you can raise your hand again. Okay, there he is. Okay, I'm going to allow him to talk. Let's see how that works. Go ahead, Kurt. You can say, unmute yourself. And
well, I've just put it all into chat since I wasn't sure I would be given a chance. And I do have an unstable connection, so you've been sort of going in and out. I don't know whether I would, but so I basically put everything I'd like to say into the chat. Hopefully everybody can see that. I know it's a bit long, but it's sort of covered.
Oh, I see it now.
I would like to make.
I can read it out if that helps. You are cutting in just a little bit, so cutting in and out.
Yeah, again, I don't know whether my connection going out is as unstable as yours coming in.
It's a little bit choppy, so I'll read it out to everybody, okay?
Yep.
Thank you. So Kurt said the 100-acre wood is surrounded by neighborhoods. Since before the city acquired the property, residents of those neighborhoods and others have walked the trails, many with their dogs, the majority of which have been off leash. That practice continues. The degradation of the once pristine forest by harvesting old growth trees, building a road, installing barbed wire, creating gravel pits, compacting the soil, introducing non-native and or invasive species, having encampments, bicycle ramps, etc., have been caused by humans. There's currently an encampment with a large tent, which has been in place for several months. The compilation of studies, of the Chuckanut Community Forest flora and fauna in Ann Eisinger's extensive report reflects a diverse and healthy ecosystem despite many years of off-leash dogs. And the forest has no salmon runs, no major waterway emptying directly into Chuckanut Creek, and no sheep. Clearly, the city and the park district had a different vision in 2014 in the conservation easement granted to the park district, which allowed the city as grantor the right to do or permit off-leash dog trails with centralized forest obstacle exercise area. I asked the steering committee to reconsider its exclusivity on leash decision. If the committee would consider off-leash on at least some trails, a reasonable compromise would be allowing off-leash on all minor or secondary trails like the Seaholm Arboretum. Such off-leash permission could be in exchange for requiring on-leash in the lower arroyo trails that are close to Chuckanut Creek. All right, thank you, Kurt. I hope that was a good translation of what you had there. Yeah, very good. All right, Steve Walker, I'm going to turn you on so you can speak.
Thank you, David. It's nice to see you. I just, I know the Whatcom Land Trust holds a relatively large conservation easement on the wetland portion that's west of the interurban and rises up to the sort of central intersection at the top of the hill. And I was hoping that I could see a map that shows that, because that area is, the conservation easement requires primarily habitat considerations and a requirement that any planned trails in that area be approved by and I noticed that the map showed some trails in there, so I was trying to get a sense of where where those boundaries are.
Steve, you broke up just before you were stating the approved by, and then who? It broke up right then.
Okay, well, I know that conservation easement requires that the land trust approve any trails through the conservation easement. And I see on the map that there are some trails in the master plan that go through that area. And, or at least that's the way I remember it. Hoping to see a map that showed an overlay of conservation easement held by the land trust in that planning area. I mean, if you don't have it, that's fine. I can get it elsewhere.
Lane, do you have anything like that that you can quickly access, or is it, okay, she's shaking her head no, so.
No, but it's a publicly recorded document. So if you go to the county auditor site, you can pull it up. I'll put the auditor's file number in the chat for you.
Yeah, thanks. I have other ways to get it, but that's great.
And Steve, you want to say anything more about the designated bike route? I see your comment there. Otherwise, I'll skip right over that.
Well, sure, as long as I have the microphone. I
Yep.
really like the idea of the crushed limestone trail that would go from Viewcrest to the interurban. That would be really nice for cyclists as a way to eliminate having to go all the way down and cross the 12th Street Bridge and onto Old Fairhaven Parkway. So I think that's a great public service to have that trail, which I saw on the planning map. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Steve. All righty, let's see. Sonia had a question. What is the best way to submit feedback on this plan? Is there an email address or an Engage Bellingham page for collecting it? Your microphone is muted.
There's an Engage Bellingham page. You go to Engage Bellingham, there's a page for the Chuckanut Community Forest that we're collecting all sorts of comments and feedback there.
All right. Well, let's see. Josh Parrish had a question. Have any responsible local trail organizations been consulted regarding bike trails, for example, WMBC?
Recreation Northwest, Todd Ellsworth was part of the steering committee. Again, this was a new concept. It was in an attempt to form some compromise and try and catch up a little bit in the time that the city had, since the city has acquired the property and the time it's taken us to create this master plan. We are eager to get in there and do some real considerable work on restoration. And this is a way to do a little bit of catch up as well and try and funnel some of the commuting users onto a trail that would be a little less impactful while we work on narrowing and restoring and obliterating some of those other trails. So this was a compromise concept again.
Righty, Ray asks, do you have estimated times for each phase?
I would say just estimated the first phase would probably be over the next 1 to 4 years. And then we're going to hopefully start at least one of the more significant hydrologic reconnections along with some of implementing first phase. But those bigger projects we're going to have to fit into our budget and our priorities.
And along with that, then Christopher asks, what is the timing? He's concerned the ever widening trails are damaging wetlands. When would phase 2 happen?
Again, phase 2 is needs to be informed and prioritized, and we're hoping to get some guidance on those priorities from the stewardship plan. We do have our own city planner has some opinions about the most important hydrologic connections. but just starting to get in there and mark the main trails, narrow the main trails, and put some better signage, I think will make a huge difference, and do some concentrated work parties. And I just want to point out that I mentioned Todd Ellsworth was on our committee, but he did not agree with our limitation on bicycles. So sorry if I implied that, Todd.
All righty, let's see now. Next, we have Dylan. What data is the city to support, excuse me, what data does the city have to support the claims that bikes are having greater impact on hiking trails? Shouldn't trails that are too steep be decommissioned to limit access, then allow bikes and peds for the remaining trails?
Our data is from observation and experience. And that's a great comment. And I encourage you to write that down and submit it. And well, now that you've submitted it, it is part of the record. So we're taking all the comments on these concepts right now.
Okay, part of the beauty of the 100-acre woods, this is Josh again, is being in the woods, not just going from point A to B. So comment noted about being in the woods. Thank you, Josh. And Craig has a question. There are already signs requiring dogs to be on leash at all entrances. Why do you need more signs?
Well, sometimes we found that, especially with our Park Ambassador program, that a lot of people don't realize, they may not read that big long rule sign. And because of a lot of people also think that what everybody else is doing is it must be okay. And there has been a culture of off-leash dogs, even though this area has always been an on-leash dog area. We believe that reinforcing the rules and reminding people what the rules are, and creating a little bit of social marketing about the importance of picking up your poop, which sometimes can't happen when your dogs are off leash. Those are all part of our social marketing. Leashing your dogs in Bellingham is a huge problem. We have way more dogs and lots and lots of poop. So it's really important. But it is important to also have places available for people to exercise their dogs off leash. And Arroyo Park is a great example. We've got a real big problem down there with off leash dogs and salmon and the creek. So I welcome your ideas about that kind of trading. And I think we need to think about this together. And again, we're putting this out for the public for the first time to get your feedback. So this is all really good information that you're sharing with us about your thoughts.
Okay. Let's see. An anonymous attendee here and said, asked, would the city entertain a beginner level bike loop around the perimeter of the park and indicate permitted usage with signage of bike friendly versus non?
I'm not quite sure what that means exactly. There really isn't a trail that goes all the way around the perimeter of this park. But we have talked about perhaps doing some sort of bike skills area in Fairhaven Park proper, not within this forested area though.
Okay. And let's see, John Tuxil says, it sounds like the secondary trails are not proposed for decommissioning while remain mostly in their current state. Is that correct? That's his first question.
With the exception of those ones we clearly identified, that was one of the hardest meetings, is trying to get everyone to agree on which trails to decommission. But those were the few. We had many more that we proposed and they were shot down. So I think that's where we're at right now. Those were the ones we could agree on as a committee.
And then his second question was, how long would it be in terms of phase 1, 2, etc., before boardwalks would be a consideration for bridging muddy spots along the secondary trails?
Again, I think I answered that question already, but those types of boardwalks are very expensive and complicated projects. We'd like to try and prioritize them to restore the most important hydrologic connections first. and get rid of those redundant trails and those big wide open areas and start to do some replanting in there. But it will just take time, and we're hoping to get some guidance from the stewardship plan on that prioritization.
Okay, I hope those answer your questions, John.
David, can I jump in on John's first question? I think he's asking about the trails that aren't identified for decommissioning, what will happen to some of those. And I wanted to clarify that there's some other trails that have been identified as these need further evaluation or further analysis. And that's where really having an expert and a stewardship plan will help us. There are some other places where we do know that there's hydrology, connection issues or muddy trails, but we need further analysis. So we tried to pick the ones that were clear, they didn't meet our criteria, and identify those now. And then we'll work on some of those more complex decommissioning projects down the road.
All right, thank you, Lane. That's a helpful clarification. So Steve also, Walker wanted to also clarify that from his most recent comment, the Whatcom Land Trust Chuckanut Wetland Conservation Easement is the area he was asking for delineation. All righty, and I will slide over to the chat here in a moment, but we've got a few more in the Q&A. Let's see, anonymous attendee also asks, how are these improvements being paid for? Yes, how will they be paid for is perhaps the better question.
Improvements to these types of existing facilities, when we bring in something new, we can use park impact fees. And also we can use greenways funding if they're identified in the greenways strategic plan.
Right, thank you. And so another anonymous attendee, just curious about the data that was collected regarding dogs off leash. When I have observed dogs off leash, they are generally leashed in high traffic areas and unleashed when it is clear that it's reasonably safe to do so. Clearly, this area is used quite frequently for dog walkers by surrounding neighborhoods. Do you think the data is representative of the off-leash use, given that the survey was taken at trail entrances? Yes, there's two surveys, right? There's the survey on site and the survey online.
We have people self-reporting. We had people observed at the entrance, and then we have just the anecdotal, what we hear and what we all know from spending time in this area. I think it would be impossible to get super clear about that. What we do know is that there's an awful lot of people who really enjoy walking their dogs in this area. That's one thing we know for sure. And we also know that there aren't enough dog waste stations to help support the number of dogs that are clearly visiting this area. We know that for sure. And we know that our population is growing. And it seems like everybody's getting a dog nowadays. So yeah, we've got to manage that. And in our more pristine areas, it's really important that we do the best we can to minimize the impact.
Let's see, will the entire trail from Fairhaven Park to the interurban be crushed limestone? I think this would remain primarily natural, a dirt trail. That is part of the charm of the 100-acre woods. Comment, man.
Again, that is an existing gravel road right now. So what we're talking about is just improving it, making it a little more accessible, a little less bumpy, but again, only on that existing gravel roadway, not on a hard packed dirt trail. We're talking about an existing road, improving that with some limestone. Top dressing, if you will.
Catherine noted that she thinks that if dogs are on leash and if owners pick up their poop and throw it away, this forest is a good place for dogs. She personally feels safer when she walks in the area with her dogs. There's a comment for you. All righty. David says the trails you plan to block will cut off a significant amount of the woods for hikers. How will you handle hiker created trails? There are many more hiker created trails in the woods than you show on your map.
And yeah, that's probably true. Again, we're just going to keep trying to, by identifying the main routes to go and trying to start to block the ones that are especially in redundant and go across real muddy critical areas. We're just going to try and keep doing our best. I mean, that's all we can do. We've had this in other places where Northridge Park is a great example where we did quite a bit of outreach to the neighborhood because there was a lot of little trails that kept getting built and we were having a real problem with invasive species. A lot of it has to do with informing the community about why and trying to just reinforce. Once we have a plan, then we're going to be able to reinforce it a lot easier. Right now, we're just getting more and more social trails and not doing anything about it. So getting this plan is going to give us the beginning to start to really address it and do something about it.
Okay, we have about 5 more in the Q&A and we have lots of conversation going on in the chat. So I will move over there in just a moment. Let's see, most people on bikes in the forest are not just trying to get from point A to point B, they're trying to spend time in the woods, just like walkers and other park users. Graveling and funneling all bike traffic to one main through trail will not satisfy that group. Comment noted. What's the management plan for homeless camps? Jennifer asks.
Our management plan for homeless camps across the city is that we would really appreciate it if you report them and their location, and the more specific information you can provide, the better. There's a reporting website on the city's page. It's through the police department, and those reports really help us verify and address, especially those camp cleanups. Yeah, please report them.
Okay, question from Christopher. Boardwalks and other phase 2 will wait until money is available. Is there a possibility the park district can continue collecting revenue to pay for wetland protection?
It's not a question about money. We have funding, and the park district was created to repay the loan. That was their purpose. So I don't believe that, I think that we can work on prioritizing and getting some projects in the budget and identify them and start working on them, especially the most important ones, as soon as possible, while we work on the phase 1 implementation, getting the signage, marking those main trails, trying to block some of the other trails. Again, as to exactly what the park district could do, I suppose we should probably talk to Bob Carmichael.
Okay. So Anonymous is also curious if there is any data on coyotes or anything about wildlife conservation as part of the master plan. I personally love seeing the coyotes, but there have been fewer and fewer every year, and I'm worried they are being forcibly removed.
Again, this master plan is a park master plan focused on uses and protection and goals for the area. But there is a very in-depth reference to the flora and fauna inventory in the baseline study. And we also have some work coming out of that urban forestry management plan that addresses habitat corridors and how wildlife moves around within our forest. But I don't know anything specific about coyotes. I just don't know.
So I guess, one of the things you just pointed out is there are numerous other planning efforts going on in the city for fire, for forest management, for wildlife corridors, salmon, all these things. And they kind of overlap with the master plan in some ways too, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So you don't have to pull all those things into the master plan. You can just refer to those other documents. All righty, let's see here. Another question. I think some people are getting off track talking about dog waste pickup being combined with off leash. There is more dog waste on the inner urban, which is leashed. I don't think it serves well to combine the two. Okay. And another comment also, there are a lot of people constantly cleaning up after other people who aren't being responsible. I know I do that. And let's see, if you have funding for boardwalks and other trail improvements, why can't you determine a timeline?
I'm sorry, I was reading, I got sidetracked by the chat. What was that one again?
If you have funding for boardwalks and other trail improvements, why can't you determine a timeline?
Well, again, we're just completing the master plan. That's the first step. And once we identify what those projects are, then we can start adding them to our budget. We plan 6 years out. And so there's a lot of other projects already identified, but I would love to start getting something specific on the upcoming biennial budget that we'll start working on here in 2022 that will focus on projects in 23 and 24. It would be great to get a project on for this area.
And you will be informed in part by the stewardship plan, which is being written at this moment, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, for the moment, those are all of the questions that were in the Q&A. Now we have about 34 messages new in the chat, so I'm moving over there. I'm going to just note that there are a lot of back and forth about dog waste and dogs and things, and those will all be recorded here.
Did you focus any questions that might be raised that we need?
I'm scanning through those. There is a note here. There are existing trails on the land trust easement that existed before the property was gifted to the land trust. So no new ones have been proposed so far. Let's see here, questions, looking for questions. Lots of dog poop. Let's see. Comment about the ban on people riding bicycles on trails seems like it would really limit a large percentage of the people recreating in the park. It is assumed that people on bikes are going from one side to another, but I'm not sure that's correct. I usually use the park for jogging, but when I have encountered bikes, they have been very polite, and I often see children or less competent riders learning how to ride on the trails with small routes and other features. I even see parents riding on these trails with their children on their handlebars. Woo. For them, to do this somewhere else would require them to make a car trip, ultimately adding carbon emissions and degrading the environment in that way. I would respectfully ask the committee to reconsider this, or at least do further study of what kind of riding is done in the park. All right, thank you, Sonia. Let's see, more support for mountain bike use, family biking supported, just scanning through here. Let's see here. Others want to share with all users. Looking for a question in here somewhere. Maybe slower bike speeds within the area would be considered. Recognition that boardwalks are not complicated. The paperwork is weird since they fix a problem, not create a problem. Let's see. I'm looking for questions that stand out here. There is a developing trail from Sea Pines to the secondary trail. Probably need to formalize that. Let's see. There's a disagreement that there are many user trails in the 100 acres that are not mapped. The map is recorded nearly all of them. It's an impressive map. Okay. Thanks to Nicole and Lane and the park staff. Let's see here. Some people who are appreciating the area, the magical area inside the Black Gate. and more to come in that area. Let's see. Lots of comments, but not very many questions. If there is no shortage of funding, then why not have a poop bag station at the 24th Street entrance in Viewcrest?
That's part of the plan.
Let's see. I'm back over to all of the comments. There's some more thank yous in there. One question here: can the host please respond to the query about designating secondary trails and part of the park as an off-leash permissible?
I think, just to be clear, we're presenting where we're at right now. This is the work of not just me and Lane. This was a committee work. So we're compiling all of your comments and feedback, and we're going to be having another meeting with the steering committee to contemplate any new ideas that we heard and just review all of the feedback that we've gotten and fine tune the plan.
And I think the last one for the evening, unless someone else has something to contribute, the question is, if the park district can pay off their loan, why are they not doing so? Does some party benefit from the loan remaining outstanding?
My understanding is that you should probably check with the park district on that. But I do believe that the debt has been paid as of the end of 2021. There are additional costs that the park district needs to incur to transfer the easement and ensure that the monitoring and maintenance of that easement over time. But again, I would talk to the Chuckanut Community Forest Park District about the specifics of where they're at with that. They report that on their website. They're very clear with where they're at with paying back that loan.
And along that lines, will the city ask the park district to donate its sizable surplus to the city and the city to move the money from the general fund to the 100-acre wood master plan implementation when the park district is dissolved?
The park district board did say that any additional surplus would go back to the city, but exactly where it would go, I'm not exactly sure how that would work, but I'm sure they could designate that it go toward implementing the plan if they so desire.
It's kind of an unusual situation, isn't it? Yeah. Let's see, last question here tonight, I think, if we can call it that. Has there been consideration of putting responsibility on users to behave responsibly? Consistently good behavior could lead to greater allowances. Poor behavior could lead to restrictions. Dog waste would not be an issue if everyone cleaned up after their dogs. So consideration for putting responsibility on the users?
I think that's something we do every day all over in our parks. But again, we're developing the rules right now and the signage to reinforce those rules and getting feedback on what we're proposing. But we always are depending on our users in parks to be good stewards and take care of and respect the area and respect the beautiful park system we have.
Okay, we have a couple more questions in the chat, and since we don't have any bell ringing here, we'll ask about why not ask bikers everywhere on trails to ring bells when they're coming up behind people?
Well, that's a great comment. We actually are in the middle of installing a new trail courtesy signs on our arterial trail network that do ask that you there's several different guiding principles, to slow down, to let people know you're coming, to scoop your poop, and to not speed, and to slow down in congested areas. As we added the e-bikes allowance on all of our trails, we also added a speed limit of 15 miles per hour, and we are reducing that limit. And in several areas that we're seeing a lot of conflicts, we're adding some additional signage about yielding bicycles, yielding to pedestrians, and even a walk zones in areas such as the Stone Bridge in Whatcom Falls Park. And Todd is saying, give us a time frame. So the feedback on, we really want to hear from you by the end of next week. Is that correct, Lane? Isn't that right? And then we'll be meeting with the steering committee again and reviewing all of your input. And we'll be capturing all of this chat, and we will be summarizing it for the steering committee and working on some refinements to the proposals based on all the feedback we received. And again, we will have some survey on short surveys on some of those critical points where we really feel like we need to get feedback. And this was really helpful.
So just one last thing, Paul noted that he's asking if there's a new survey. The one he sees is the one he already filled out. Will there be a new one?
There will be. Today is our open house. We're going to post this presentation and then create a couple of additional survey questions based on what we said we were going to do. So that's coming probably by tomorrow, I think.
I think I said by Friday it would be posted on Engage Bellingham.
Okay, by Friday.
And will the maps be on the Engage Bellingham site as well by any chance? Or this presentation perhaps?
This presentation will be recorded. The recorded version of the presentation will be posted.
I wonder if you can just put the PowerPoint too, so people can see that as well.
They'll see it because it was recorded, so they'll see all the maps as well. But we could post the PowerPoint itself. Sure.
That might be my suggestion. Yeah.
Okay. Good idea.
All righty, folks. I think we'll call it an evening. Thank you, everyone, for your comments and your thoughts and participation tonight. Nicole, any last thoughts?
No, this is a great feedback. We really appreciate everyone who came. Thanks for your comments.
Good night, everyone.